unless Bryson comes back and he's going to get his own, intellectual property rights back, that's what it's all about for him. This guy makes millions of dollars on YouTube, where we're talking right now. I mean, it was part of the issue that drove Phil away. He said that they don't have the rights to their own NIL. So for somebody like Bryson, I mean, it's not just a calculation of the competition of him playing on LIV. I mean, so there's that to consider. Look, this Koepka thing, that's a pretty big deal. And we'll see, what kind of impact it has. So, you talk about mixing things up or, shaking things up. I mean, the PGA Tour is now partially owned by private equity. I mean, that's something that never happened before. I mean, this strategic sports group input $1.5 billion, and I guess there's a commitment for another $1.5 billion, so $3 billion. And, the players are now equity partners. They have an equity stake. Things are radically different. I mean, it used to be that the PGA Tour was a 501, C3? I don't even know the numbers, but a charitable, It was run as a charity. It's not run as a charity anymore. Now it's PGA Tour Enterprises, and they've kind of reconfigured the whole thing. It doesn't mean the charity is going to go away. It just means that this is a for-profit enterprise now. So it's different. Competitive golf is in such a good place, which is really interesting because as recently as a couple of years ago, it wasn't, at least not in terms of viewership.
Hey everybody, Trey Wingo here. We have a great conversation with someone in the game of golf. Speaking of golf, do not forget, if you like the Straight Facts Homie channel, which by the number of subscribers we continue to grow with on a daily basis, it sure looks like you do. Make sure you check out and subscribe to our Trey Wingo Golf YouTube channel. We're collaborating with a lot of the stuff we have here in the Straight Facts Homie podcast. We're going to be doing a lot more in the game of golf in terms of travel, equipment, interviews with players and people in the game. So if you like what you're seeing here and you want to have more of it, make sure you check out Trey Wingo Golf on YouTube as well, as long as subscribing to the Straight Facts Only podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. This week's guest, though, is a guy that I've known for almost 35 years now. He's been a solid, constant voice in the game of golf on the Golf Channel and NBC. And previous to that, we worked together at ESPN. His name is Jimmy Roberts. And how he got into the game of golf is a little interesting. So sit back and enjoy our conversation with Jimmy Roberts. You probably don't remember this at all, but I knew I was going to be a Jimmy Roberts fan in 1998 when I started at ESPN News at ESPN in 1997. And then in 1998, I was doing SportsCenter, and you were doing a preview hit for the PGA Championship at Sahalee. Do you remember what the first line of that preview was?
Oh, my God. Come on. That's not fair. I have no clue. What did I say?
Here's what it was. And now for something completely different. And to this day, that has stuck with me because obviously Sahalee was a different major venue than anything we've ever seen before. But it's also an homage to really brilliantly smart people, a reference to Monty Python, because that was their line all the time. And I knew as soon as you said that, I'm like, this guy's all right.
We have the same warped sense of humor. As a matter of fact, I've been wanting to ask you something, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm a proud graduate of the University of Maryland, and I could swear that you are the first person I ever heard say the words, "Fear the turtle." Did you make that up? Seriously?
No, I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll take credit. I'll take credit for it in this podcast. Absolutely not. But I have said that on occasion, but I can't. There's no way I could have been the first. No way, no chance.
Well, here's what I'd say. You may have said it on occasion. You certainly haven't said it in a long time, unless you're talking about our lacrosse team. So.
Yeah. So I guess, because you were sort of an all-over reporter at ESPN, and then it sort of you sort of fell into the golf niche. Or niche, however you want to say it. Was that something that you always wanted to do, or is that sort of just happened by where they put you?
So I came to ESPN in 1988. I had never been in front of a camera before. I had been a writer and producer at ABC Sports, and during my time, and ABC News. And during my time there, one of the things that I did was I was part of the golf production crew. So I get to ESPN, and I'm if I'm not mistaken, I think I'm the first bureau reporter. Then they hired Andrea Kramer and Chris Myers, and the three of us were, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. And so I'm running all over the place. And one of the things I realized was that if it would be a good thing to kind of stake out some ground. We covered a lot of baseball. We obviously covered a lot of football. Hockey, not as much, although Steve Levy, that was his thing. Yeah. His right. And I was looking around and I had to think to myself, well, what could I cover that nobody cares about? And I thought, so I wouldn't have to kind of fight anybody for the territory. Yeah. And I figured, well, I know a bunch of people in golf from my days at ABC, and I knew the landscape, I knew the players, I knew folks from the USGA and the PGA Tour. So I suggested to our then boss, Steve Anderson, that we cover some golf. And we started out by covering the Ryder Cup, doing some features, which back then nobody really was terribly interested in.
Correct.
And I kind of fell into being the golf reporter by default because nobody else really wanted to do it. And then Tiger happened, and everything changed. So it just was kind of a happy accident, and it's kind of come to be, to a large degree, a big part of my life, although I still do a lot of other stuff. I did, halftime in Notre Dame football for a bunch of years at NBC. What else did I mean, at ESPN, I covered hockey and baseball. I mean, we all did everything back then. But yeah, I kind of fell into it.
Now, did you always love the game, or was this just something that became an acquired taste because of what you were doing professionally?
I mean, I grew up with the game. I've never been very good. What I like to say is,
same.
I always loved the game. The game didn't always love me, and it still doesn't. But I just think it's unique in that, I mean, how many of the sports that we follow do we play? There's really only two that I can think of. And, I'm sure there's more than that. The people who are out there who are swimmers will probably be angry with me for saying that. But I mean, the fact of the matter is it's unique. Golf and tennis, for the most part, are sports that we know the biggest stars, and, we go out there and we play. And I think that golf has been a bigger deal for a number of reasons over the last kind of couple of decades, since the days of McEnroe and Chris Evert and the biggest stars, Federer. That's another thing I did at Wimbledon for a bunch of years at NBC.
Sure.
Excuse me. But I think tennis shot itself in the foot, and I think golf was kind of walking down that road. And I think there's been something of a self-correction here. But I mean, the problem with tennis, in my opinion, was that it's on every week, and it's on every week everywhere. And sometimes there's several events on. And, I say this all the time. It's basically, I didn't do terribly well in the quantitative sciences at Maryland, but I do remember this from my Econ 101 class. If you want to make something more valuable, you don't make more of it, you make less of it.
Right.
And I think that, after Tiger, the tour wanted to plant a flag in every weekend there was. And I think the ratings suffered. And anytime Tiger wasn't in an event, it didn't do terribly well. And it was kind of following tennis. So,
well, it certainly course corrected significantly. And we'll get to that in a minute. But what you just said about tennis to me is really interesting, because you're talking to someone who grew up watching Jimmy Connors and McEnroe versus Borg. Hell, I remember when some guy named Tim Lewis made it to the Wimbledon finals somehow, some way.
I remember that.
And it really has been, because there was tennis that was elevated above golf, and then golf sort of came along and it started to grow. Were you at the 92 PGA Championship at Belle Reve? Were you covering that?
I was not at the 92. Nick Price?
Nick Price, yeah.
Yes, I was.
Okay,
yes,
I thought so, because I was working locally in St. Louis at this time, and that was the first time I ever had an introduction to a name that's going to be very familiar to you, named Mike McQuaid. Now, yeah, exactly. For those that don't know, Exactly. For those that don't know, Mike McQuaid is still arguably, in my opinion, one of the best TV producers in the history of the medium. He's doing great things at ESPN now, but he is, as you said, the Dark Prince. Paul Azinger once told me, "I'm not scared of anybody. I'm scared of Mike McQuaid." And I was the local NBC affiliate in St. Louis, and we were waiting to interview somebody. Maybe it was Nick, somebody after the first or second round or whatever. And McQuaid's out there. It's like, "Hey, ESPN, we're going to get him for 2 minutes." And I was like, "I don't care if you're from ESPN. If I get him first, I'm getting him." You know what I mean?
Right.
And Mike sort of looked at me like, I looked at him like, and I think on some level he like, okay, I respect that because you're not just going to roll over here for ESPN coming into town. And then I got to ESPN and I rolled over for Mike whenever he said bark, because he is one of the more terrifying individuals you will ever meet in your life. Great at his job and a great guy, but you know who's the boss when Mike McQuaid starts talking.
Yeah, Mike, as a matter of fact, when he's a very talented guy and hardworking, really hardworking, and really loves the game, although he kind of supervises everything now. But when I first covered golf at ESPN, when it was just me out there, it was me and McQuaid.
Yeah.
So it was just the two of us. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we had we had sets all over the place. We had, a set at the Players, and we had a set at the Masters, and it became a big deal, and it became his domain. And he really turned it into something, kind of must-watch TV. And Mike loves golf, man. He really does love golf.
He does. And, I think the other thing that I remember about you before I got there is that you got the role in the movie Tin Cup.
That's true.
You were the reporter asking Kevin Costner's, character, like, what the hell, man? And I was like, damn, Jimmy Roberts is in a movie. And I was like, Jimmy Roberts covers golf. Jimmy Roberts is in a movie. Ergo, I want to be Jimmy Roberts. I mean, that's sort of the way it went for me. That had to be fun as hell to do.
Oh, my goodness. Are you kidding me? That was just so much fun. And the backstory on that was that Peter Gammons was friendly with Ron Shelton, who wrote the movie and directed the movie. And because Shelton was a big baseball player, and he had also done
Bull Durham.
What was did Bull Durham, and anyway, so
White
he
Man
was
Can't
friendly
Jump.
with,
he did all those great movies.
Yeah. So he was friendly with Gammons, and he went to Gammons and he said, "Who's the Peter Gammons of golf at ESPN?" And I was flattered. He introduced him to me. I still remember he introduced him to me at Shinnecock. I guess it was the 1995 U.S. Open. And initially he was just asking me, peppering me with questions, how would this work? What, is this the way they do it? Is that the way they do it? And then a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from one of his associate producers asking if I'd like to be in the movie. And, of course, my response is trick question. Yeah. And by the way, I'm still getting residuals from that movie. It's ridiculous. But yeah, it was so much fun. We filmed my scene in Houston, and I was there for like 6 days. It was crazy. And a lot of fun. I mean, the big thrill for me was that, if you remember, Cheech Marin was in the movie, and I grew up a big Cheech and Chong was my thing. And the fact that I got to hang with Cheech Marin every day, I was like, this is the greatest. And little known fact, which I just got such a giggle out of, Cheech Marin, who, along with his partner Tommy Chong, for those who don't remember who they are or aren't familiar with them, they basically made a living kind of having fun with the marijuana culture of the 60s and 70s.
Correct. When
it was counterculture and it was very outlaw stuff. And it turns out that Cheech Marin's dad was an LA cop. And I thought that was the funniest thing. But they were all great, Kevin Costner couldn't have been nicer. And we had a lot of good times on that set. I certainly did. It was like fantasy land for me.
Yeah, anybody that can pull Cheech and Chong and Monty Python, we are speaking the same language, brother.
There you go.
There's no doubt about it. Here's my only thing about that movie, and I love that movie. I felt like the whatever course they played for the supposed U.S. Open, it felt like it was the old Deposit Guarantee Classic in Mississippi.
Well, it kind of was. It was in Houston.
Yeah.
It was, am I going to get this right? Kingwood or something like that?
Yeah, Kingswood, I think is what it is. Yeah.
Yes. Well, whatever. I'm going to get that wrong. But, I mean, look, was the verisimilitude 100% perfect? No. But they worked really, really hard. I still have upstairs in my attic somewhere. They made merch from that U.S. Open. I still have merch, like a hat from that U.S. Open and the crew jacket. Listen, everybody should get a chance to do that once in their life. It's so Walter Mitty stepping into another world. It was so much fun.
Yeah. So that movie came out in 96, and then Tiger burst onto the scene in 97. When did you know, holy shit, things are really about to change?
Well, so I had been covered, Tiger was a thing.
Yeah, U.S. Amateur 3 years in a row, Junior Amateur 3 years in a row.
Right, 3 years in a row, the Junior Amateur. But still, I mean, what you got to remember is that he was, if he didn't have the background that he had, he would have been just a great athlete. But that might not have risen to the attention level that it did had he not been someone who was seen as an outsider. You got to remember, back then it was a lily white sport. And if it wasn't lily white, look, there was Calvin Peete, who was a black man who was a prominent player, Ryder Cup player. There was Lee Elder, who had broken the color barrier. That was way back in 1975. And there were players, but this guy was that, and potentially maybe the greatest player to ever play, or at least that's what people were saying. So there was this anticipation about him. Look, and nobody had ever won 3 consecutive U.S. juniors. Then he won 3 straight amateurs, and the way he won the amateurs, was pretty impressive. The people that he beat, and the first one against what was his name?
Trip Keeney.
Yeah, against Hank Keeney. Trip Keeney, that's right. Yeah. Came back. Tiger was down. I forget what the margin was on the front, but he roared back and he won. Then he beat Buddy Marucci, a very, very accomplished amateur player up in Rhode Island. And then the last one, that battle against Steve Scott, I mean, he was must-see TV. So as an amateur, I think back as far back as like 1995, you knew he was going to be a thing. And look, whenever anybody is ballyhooed as the next thing, half the people want to see him because they can't wait to see if it's true, and half the people just want to see him crash and burn.
Correct.
And he came out and he turned pro after he won that U.S. Amateur, turned pro in Milwaukee. I went there for SportsCenter. I remember, being there. Actually had a really interesting experience with him. So I'd been sent out to Oregon to cover the U.S. Amateur, and he made it to the finals, of course. And I actually had to leave early because my wife was pregnant with our first child, and there were some complications. And so I do a sit-down interview with Tiger, which again shows you, how things have changed. I do this long sit-down interview with him, and then I say, yeah, listen, I got to go. I'm leaving. I got to go back home. And I never forget what he said to me. He said, I don't know, am I crazy, or isn't it usually customary to stay for the actual competition? He's giving me shit, which I love. So I left. He wins. The next week is Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And Greater Milwaukee Open, where he turns pro, the Hello World thing. Yeah. And I show up. Now there are, hundreds of media there. It was crazy. Okay. And I remember, and I saw him, and the very first thing he said to me was, "Hey, is your wife okay?" And I thought, okay. I thought that was kind of like, this guy's sharp. It was a very thoughtful thing to say. But from there, it was off to the races. He won that fall, qualified, turned pro that summer, qualified for the Tour Championship, which back then was just the top 30. in what was that, 3 months or whatever it was, or a couple months. It was nuts.
Yeah.
So, and then he was off to the races, next year wins the Masters, and it hasn't been the same since.
No, and I've said this to a bunch of people, and I'd love to get your opinion on it because you've sort of been through this as long as anyone else has. I feel like 2025 on the PGA Tour was the best year in the post really competitive Tiger Woods era of the PGA Tour.
Mm-hmm.
The stories were incredible. Rory completes the Grand Slam. Scottie Scheffler wins 2 majors and is on pace on some level with where Tiger Woods sort of began his amazing run. Tommy Fleetwood breaks through and finally wins on the PGA Tour. I felt like there were more interesting stories in 2025 on the PGA Tour than any year since peak Tiger.
Yeah, I could listen. I think that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, Scheffler's just.
Yeah. I
can't wait to see what he becomes, and it'll be really interesting to see where Rory goes from here. Competitive golf is in such a good place, which is really interesting because as recently as a couple of years ago, it wasn't, at least not in terms of viewership, and I mean, and that's not a knock on the players or, what they accomplished, but the numbers don't lie, and the ratings were down. And then, last year they just zoomed through the roof. So it's very, very interesting to see where it goes from here.
It is. And now we find ourselves in this post-combative LIV situation, for lack of a better term. Brooks obviously has left the LIV Tour, and we're trying to figure out the pathway back for him. Bryson DeChambeau has been open about, well, hold on a minute now. If he's leaving, we need to figure this stuff out. And if he ever decides to leave LIV or return, I don't know what LIV has to offer anymore, because they got big names. There's no question that LIV provided big names for their tour. The product, though, just has not translated in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not sure that it was ever even supposed to, because there was obviously another agenda. Besides just create a tour, they wanted to create a seat at the table so they could have their influence the way they do over English Premier Soccer and Formula One. But I feel like LIV is teetering on a very slippery edge right now, where it may fall off a cliff and people will say, "Oh yeah, that thing," for a couple of years.
Listen, that's entirely possible, but there's something else that you have to consider here. Our experience as consumers with LIV in the United States is not entirely, I mean, it's not reflective of the experience elsewhere in the world. And let's take this, one little piece at a time here. So what does LIV have to offer that the PGA Tour doesn't? Well, I mean, unless Bryson comes back and he's going to get his own, intellectual property rights back, that's what it's all about for him. This guy makes millions of dollars on YouTube, where we're talking right now. I mean, and that was part of the issue that drove Phil away. He said that they don't have the rights to their own NIL. Yep. So for somebody like Bryson, I mean, it's not just a calculation of the competition and him playing on LIV. I mean, so there's that to consider. But look, this Koepka thing that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And we'll see, what kind of impact it has. I've been listening the last couple of days. I'm going to have Greg Norman as a guest on my podcast and show next week. And so I was getting ready and listening to a couple of shows that he had done over in Australia. He was down there for the Australian Open. And, he talked about how when LIV came to Brisbane, that it absolutely was an explosive event. Now, listen, that's him talking about something, he's going to be biased. Sure. But the fact of the matter is that these events have an appeal because what they do, and I think that this is the point of, what the people from LIV would say, that what they're doing is they're promoting the game, they're building tourism, In the Far East, Norman will tell you that the majority of the golf courses being built in the world are being built between, you know, Australia and the Pacific Rim out there, Vietnam. I mean, these are places where it's all about or tourism. And so I don't know that they look at that product the same way there as we do here. And these are places where, a lot of these places don't get these great golfers to come and visit. So I'm not so sure where I stand on that. I'll be very interested to hear what he has to say about it. But certainly here in the United States, it's not been something that has been successful, at least not commercially. But, there are other reasons potentially for that as well. I mean, I've heard some really interesting rumblings about why did Fox get involved? Well, maybe they got involved because, they're hoping to curry favor with the Saudis so that they can stay in the race for the World Cup, soccer, football, when it's there
Right.
and, whatever year. But listen, I think that it's complicated, and it's clearly they're not in the same position that they were, to answer your question, even a year ago.
Well, what you just said there was really interesting to me because I've known Brian Rowlap for a long time with my association with the NFL and
Yep.
him being number 2 for Roger Goodell. He's not afraid to upset the apple cart. Like, this guy is not afraid to shake the tree and see what falls. And the idea of that NIL thing, I think, is very interesting because I don't think a lot of people think about golf in that way, in the same way we would automatically apply that thought process to NIL and image and likeness when it comes to college football. But I think that is a really interesting topic that could be something that might change dramatically when Brian sort of asserts whatever is going to be the new standard for the PGA Tour.
So, you talk about mixing things up or, shaking things up. I mean, the PGA Tour is now partially owned by private equity. I mean, that's something
Correct.
that never happened before. I mean, this strategic sports group input a billion and a half, and I guess there's a commitment for another billion and a half, so $3 billion. And, the players are now equity partners. They have an equity stake. Things are radically different. I mean, it used to be that the PGA Tour was a 501, C3? I don't even know the numbers, but, a charitable,
Right.
It was run as a charity. It's not run as a charity anymore. Now it's PGA Tour Enterprises. And, they've kind of reconfigured the whole thing. It doesn't mean the charity is going to go away. It just means that
No.
this is a for-profit enterprise now. So it's different.
And I will say this: I'll give LIV credit. If they hadn't come along and done what they've done, I don't think the PGA Tour would have had the elevated events and suddenly see that prize money go up to $20 million at some of those events. You can't say that would have happened if LIV hadn't decided to do what they did, which made the PGA Tour look at themselves and say, okay, how can we do this differently?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Norman talks about being a disruptor and doing this for the players. And, no doubt the players have benefited. I mean, I don't know what the bottom line is in terms of individual players, but, there's a lot of streams of revenue that didn't exist before LIV became a part of the landscape.
Yeah, and the other thing that Brian said, which I think is very interesting, he said we will honor the traditions of this game, but we will not be
Right.
held to them.
Bound.
And I think that has a lot of bound to them, right? I think that has a lot of people saying, well, what does that mean? And I can tell you from my experiences in dealing with Brian that anything is on the table if it makes sense. And
Right.
I think that some of the things that he's talked about publicly, and maybe some of the things he hasn't even brought up yet but have been internalized privately, might really, really make the game look very different in about a year.
I think what a lot of people have either forgotten or don't know is that when the PGA Tour first came into existence, I may be off by a year. I think it was 1967, might have been 1968. Initially, all of these professionals who ran around the country and played competitive golf, that was part of the PGA of America, and there was something called the Tournament Players Division. And led by Gardner Dickinson, Arnold Palmer, and Jack Nicklaus in 67 or 68, whatever it was, they decided to basically secede and say, we're going to start our own organization. And, of course, famously or infamously, I guess, the trade was that the PGA of America said, okay, you just give us, initially the discussion was, well, what should we keep? Should we keep the World Series of Golf or should we keep the Ryder Cup? And the PGA Tour said, no, we want the World Series of Golf. You take that Ryder Cup thing, which back then, couldn't draw flies. And now it's become their lifeblood. But the point is that this isn't, it's not similar, but it's not entirely dissimilar from the fact that there was once a different entity, and there's, that was what, 40 something years ago. It's change, it's changing. That's the last time that there was significant change in the game.
You mentioned the Ryder Cup there a couple of times, and you're right. No one cared until we started losing. That's the way it went. It's become my favorite sporting event, Jimmy. I love the Ryder Cup. It's different in every way. It was different, unfortunately, in a couple of ways this last year at Bethpage. It got out of control. But the bigger issue for me is, why can't we be better at it? Like, how do we, and I'm using the royal we here, the United States, total homer right now. The Euros they're fun. They're fun to watch. They played unbelievably well that weekend in extremely hostile environment.
It's terrible.
It was awful. And then what the head of the PGA said after it just made it worse. And finally he had to backtrack on that. But how do we as a country figure out how to play this thing better?
Well, I think, the United States has had it figured out at times. I think back to what Paul Azinger did when he was captain.
2008.
At Valhalla.
Yep.
He created a different system where he played his players in what he called pods.
Yep.
He went about it scientifically and identified a weakness and turned this weakness into a strength. And it was pretty smart. And that gave birth to this committee that then, evaluated where they were going. Now listen, I have always said, and I really still think this is true, I know the United States players desperately want to win, but my observation has been, and I'm not talking about the week of the Ryder Cup, but the Ryder Cup to Europeans is the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
In golf, I think the Ryder Cup, I think it's still true. Ryder Cup got bigger ratings in Europe than the British Open, the Open Championship.
Yeah.
It's more important to those players. They grew up wanting to be a Ryder. I'd be silly to say that, a young golfer, that Luke Donald didn't grow up wanting to win the Open Championship. But I can't tell you how many players I've heard say they grew up, all they dreamed about was playing in a Ryder Cup.
Well, yeah.
It just means that much. And I think that's what it's about.
I don't disagree with you. I thought what Shane Lowry said when he sank the putt to make sure the Euros retained the cup was fascinating. He said, I have the chance to do the coolest thing in the world. And this is a guy that won the Open in Northern Ireland. And he was like, this would mean more. I asked that to Justin Thomas. I said, look, I know no one's more competitive than you, but how would you trade your Wanamaker trophies for a chance to sink the winning putt at the Ryder Cup? It is a different mentality that they bring to this thing. And, yet I hate it when fans say, oh, the other team wanted it more, especially in a football game. Like, I think you're full of shit. But in this situation, I think they're dead on when it does mean more to them.
What did Justin Thomas say when you asked him if he'd trade his Wanamakers?
He said he's very comfortable with his trophies.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
But he's like, no, I want to win this thing now. Like, I've got two of these things now, but now I really, like, to me, my goal is if I can get back on a team, I want to make sure I want to be a part of that winning experience. So we'll see. I mean, I guess Royal Adair is about as American as a course as we can find over there. So, although we heard that about the K Club a few years ago, and it didn't work out either.
Listen, I'll tell you something. Here, wait, just let me tell you one thing before we get off the Ryder Cup. You know, outside of maybe Justin Leonard, okay?
Yeah.
And I mean, you'd have to be a real golf nerd to kind of be able to identify, if you're a sports fan, identify Ryder Cup moments that were that big. But outside of Justin Leonard, how many people can identify gigantic American Ryder Cup moments? Okay?
Yeah.
Justin Leonard in 99 at Brookline, okay? Mm-hmm. It's the other way around. If you're a European, I mean, these guys grow up, you know, remembering, I guess these days it would be Seve at the Belfry.
Yep.
You know, and
JMO
like
at Medina, you know, captaining that team.
That's right. And, you know, Paul McGinley at the Belfry.
The Belfry.
I mean,
yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I just think that culturally there's something about it for Europeans that seems more meaningful than for Americans. Not that weak.
Yeah. My favorite line ever in the history of sports was a quote from Hale Irwin after the 91 Ryder Cup, the War on the Shore. He was out there in the final match with Bernard Langer, and Langer had that 6-foot putt to retain the cup, and he missed it. And Hale was quoted in Sports Illustrated as saying the sphincter factor was high. It's the greatest. It's the greatest quote of all time. All right, so tell us more about your new adventure. Obviously, you're doing great things with NBC and the Golf Channel, but tell us about this new podcast you got going.
Okay, so it's called The Big Swing with Jimmy Roberts. This is actually talking to you from my studio here. You know, I got together with a fellow who used to work at ESPN. His sales and marketing guy is my partner, a guy named Fred Buescher. And we were just kind of kicking. Yeah, so we were just kicking around some ideas and came across this fact, which to this day I shake my head whenever I think about it, which is that there are more golf courses in America than there are McDonald's restaurants.
That's crazy.
And that got us to thinking, yeah, that is crazy. It just got us to thinking about the size of the business. The fact of the matter is, according to the National Golf Foundation, there are a third of the American population, 125 million people, are what they call engaged in the game of golf. Now, that means they either play, they watch, they work in, they're curious about it. It's an industry that last year, globally, had a total economic impact of $250 billion. Nobody's covering it, or at least, you know, if you're interested in the business, there's really not any place you can go to talk about it. And so many of the people who are part of it are just fascinating. And, you know, their businesses are fascinating. I did a long thing with Ed Stack, who's the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods. His story is remarkable. It was, you know, in the early 80s, it was 2 sporting goods stores in upstate New York. Now it's 800 stores nationwide, and they're the biggest sports retailer, and they're heavily invested in golf. And it's really just interesting to talk to him. All sorts of people who are involved, from tourism and travel, technology, equipment. I mean, one of the things that I think is a riot is that the growing market for simulators in your home.
Yeah.
You know, 10 years ago, who had a simulator in their home? People got them all over the place now. And, you know, it's a growing part of the industry. People are curious about it. So it's a lot of fun, and I've met some really interesting people, and you know, it's, in the end, it all gets down to what I love most about sports, which is people's stories. So.
Yep, I'm with you there. I always like to find out the thing that made everything change for somebody. Like everybody has that turning point in their life where one decision, one choice, one guy choosing to support you or not support you changes everything. And then from that point on, instead of going this way, it goes this way, whether for good or sometimes for bad, and it changes your entire perspective. So I'll look forward to listening to that. Jimmy, we appreciate the time. Best of luck. And again, and now for something completely different.
Well, Trey, just let me leave you with this. So it's a podcast, but it's also going to be on Golf Channel.
Nice.
Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. So if podcasts aren't your thing, which would be odd, because then how would you be hearing this as I'm saying it now. And I can only hope they are for your benefit. But it's also on Golf Channel. But it's great to see you again.
Yeah, always fun, Jimmy. Appreciate the time.
Mahalo.